There's a lot going on in this movie.
It was like I was watching it for the first time.
I like this movie.
It has a special place in my heart.
Very close to my heart.
This was a good one.
I want to like this movie.
What? Seriously?
I loved it.
Very flat, kind of boring.
This movie blows me away. This movie turns me on.
Terrible. It is terrible. All these keys everywhere. Influences, baby.
Huge fan.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Hello out there in YouTube and podcast land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, where we talk about horror movies and science fiction films and those key elements that sometimes lift but almost always separate from the average genre fare. Are you new to us? Well, we would like to welcome you. My partner and co-host here, David Horton, is a longtime friend. We've been talking movies for, longer than we'd like to admit. And we decided, why don't we keep doing it, but maybe share some of the knowledge that we have with others out there. And if you are joining us, then you realize that we may be onto something. I don't know. If you haven't joined us, we're glad that you fell upon us. We welcome you, and we hope that you enjoy what you hear. We do alternate, usually sci-fi and horror. Sometimes we go back and do a classic from a previous season, which is what we're doing today. And that's it in a nutshell. I'm here with my co-host, David. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited because I love, those of you who have listened to us before in the Redux and all of that know that this particular one I love and adore. So I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. But I've also had a pretty good week and started a new thing, started rewatching an old thing. I tend to do that a lot, but this one, we have a sister podcast on our Patreon, shameless plug, called X-Files Declassified. And there was a show that came out in, I think it was 2008 is when it premiered and ran for a few seasons. That was an totally huge key influence was X-Files on it, called Fringe. I had watched like 4 of the 7 seasons. And
did it really last that long? I thought it was only on like 3.
No, it was 7, I think. Anyway, and it left my streaming service, so I couldn't watch it anymore. So
and it was on Max, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Because I haven't been able to watch it. I've never seen it, but it's been on a service I didn't get.
It was, let me check my notes real quick. Okay, it was 5 seasons total. So I've watched the first 3 and part of 4, and then they took it off Max, and I didn't have it anymore. And you couldn't find it anywhere unless you wanted to buy the material or rent it per episode or rent the season, and I didn't want to do that. So I was waiting. Well, it just came back, and it's on Hulu now. And so I started re-watching it. Well, rewatched season 3 leading into 4, so I remembered where I was. And this is such a fun series. I love it. And I really think it might be something we could consider for another sister podcast or something like that. Okay. It's one of J.J. Abrams' best efforts because he essentially produced it.
I didn't realize that. I've never seen any of them.
Yeah, it's J.J. Abrams, Alex Kurtzman before he decided to go and destroy Star Trek, and Robert Orci before he decided to go destroy Star Trek. It's really great because of the dynamics of the 4 principal, the five in the cast. But basically, it's just like X-Files, except you have movie of the week, you have mythos that threads through certain episodes and gets more escalated as each season goes on. Great cast, great stories, but basically a task force of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is in charge of strange science events. So it's procedural, but it works. The actual wiki definition is Fringe follows the casework of the Fringe Division, a joint federal task force supported primarily by the FBI, which includes Agent Olivia Dunham, Dr. Walter Bishop, the archetypical mad scientist, and he is excellent, excellent, excellent. It is played by John Noble. If you've ever seen him, he's amazing in it. And Peter Bishop, his son. Their stories are so cool, but very X-Files. If you watched one episode, you would go, oh my God, this is X-Files. They'll have a teaser and some guy is just walking down the hallway of his office or a big office complex and he's going down the escalator. And by the time he gets to the bottom, he just falls over and somebody rushes over to him and his skin is translucent. And you can see all of the muscles and veins in him. And then it cuts to credits. And you go, oh, okay, cool. Now we're going to deal with gelatinous skin disease
Anatomy
for this
Man.
episode. Yeah. But started rewatching it, really excited about it. Anybody out there who likes the X-Files and wants to see new stories along the same line, Fringe is great. It's out there. Get it. Go watch it. Loved it.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know how
shameless
it'll
plug,
end.
everyone go over to Patreon where you can hear
Yeah.
us talk about the first 3 seasons of X-Files. And we're getting ready to film the 4th, actually.
Yep. What about you?
Awesome.
Doing anything fun?
Oh my God. I have been
So much.
watching so many good horror movies lately that I want to tell you about all of them, and I'm saving them for these episodes.
Mhm.
So I am going to start with a big surprise for me today, a sequel called Smile 2.
Oh, I've heard it's better than the original.
I love the original, but it is ranked higher than the original on Rotten Tomatoes, and I did thoroughly enjoy this film.
Okay.
I was completely surprised because I had been avoiding it, thinking that it was like old school sequels where they have a popular movie and they crank a second one out really fast, and it's usually like lesser version of the first one. That's not like this at all. This is like Ty West. This guy, it's the same director, same writer, said, I have a sequel, let's film it, and now he's getting ready to do a third. It's going to be like a trilogy.
Okay.
The first one, of course, has Swooshy. No, is it Swooshy? What's her name? It's Kevin Bacon's daughter. Soshi Bacon, maybe? Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's great in it, but this has a great cast as well. Before I get into that, it was written and directed by Parker Finn. Like I said, the same guy. He's not done anything else but short films. So I don't know how they discovered this guy, but he is clearly a talent. The cast of this one is great. It's got a girl in it you may know. Her name is Naomi Scott.
The name sounds very familiar.
She was in like the Charlie's Angels reboot. She's like a young actress, very talented. She deserves an award for this movie. She plays like a Lady Gaga type character. It has Rosemary DeWitt in it, who you would recognize. She's a genre actress. And Kyle Gallner reprises his role from the first film. So he is in at least the beginning of it. I don't know what, let me just do a synopsis. About to embark on a new world tour, global pop sensation Sky Riley begins experiencing increasingly terrifying and inexplicable events. Overwhelmed by the escalating horrors and the pressure of fame, Sky is forced to face her dark past to regain control of her life before it spirals out of control. This movie is almost the opposite of the first movie. The first movie is very small and kind of dark. Well, I mean, both movies are dark, but the first one is about a psychologist that stumbles upon a patient where this, what I call the smile demon or whatever, it's this thing that basically follows you around until you can shake it. Very much like It Follows.
It Follows.
Yeah. Sex is not what kills this, though. It's something else. And once it latches onto you, you're shit out of luck unless you do something to get rid of it. But the first movie is just, it's smaller because it's about a psychologist that's having to deal with it by experiencing it through her patients. This one is about a global pop star that is like huge, like Lady Gaga. And all of a sudden it's her that has this demon latched onto her. You mentioned that it was you heard it was better than the first. I would definitely rank it as good as the first, if not better. It scores 86 on Rotten Tomatoes with 200 reviews. Smile only scored 79, which I think it could be a little higher than that. It's on Paramount Plus right now. I think both of them are. If anyone out there wants to see them, I highly recommend both of them. And I've already decided we should do a double feature of them next season.
Oh, with Smile 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because this guy is a new voice in horror. He's another one of those directors that keeps surprising us.
Yeah. Ty West coming out of the blue and everything. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's what I did with my genre week.
Scary smile, scary smile. How do I
Out of the
segue
blue.
from out of the blue? Yes. So what if something came out of the blue into a small desert town, but it contained an alien organism that was unknown to Earth? How about that? That's a sequel or a
That is.
segue to what we're going to talk about today, which I'm so excited about. So I will try not to talk a lot. Please interrupt me, Tim, so I will shut up sometimes. But I am so excited because we are going back to, this is a Redux episode. So those of you who are new, when we first started out our beloved little podcast, we didn't have a video component to it because Tim had to convince me to do that. And B, we didn't have the best equipment. And we have upgraded since then and gotten hopefully a little bit better with our technical abilities and also our editing and things like that. And of course, adding video. So
This
we
is
are
the Tim and David
reduxing.
show, by the way. No one else helps us. It's
Right.
just us.
Yeah, when you listen to those podcasts or YouTube channels and they go produced by blah 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 4 people and so, I'm like, yeah, we don't have that. We don't
No.
have that at all. But anyway, so we are doing what are called Redux episodes, which are a few that we do every season where we're redoing our season 1 and part of season 2 with a new look at it. And it's a little bit different look because we're a little bit older too in looking back at it and have done this for a while now. But we are going to 1971, March 12th, actually, 1971, with the release of a sci-fi thriller, the first ever sci-fi thriller, supposedly. So that's a huge key already to start with.
I disagree with that.
Called the Andromeda Strain. And I am hugely excited about it because for decades now, this has been the movie that I use to define when people go, why do you like science fiction, or what is the science fiction genre? In my opinion, Andromeda Strain is the best example of a science fiction film because science is hugely integral to it, and every single step along the way depends on science to tell the story. And so, and it's also thrilling, compelling, fantastical, even pseudo-believable at the time, which was the purpose of it, to keep some of the realism. But to me, this is a great prime example of a science fiction film. And naturally, I love it, but we'll get into that. You obviously have seen this before. So what are some opinions or takeaways you could give to it?
Well, first an opinion, and second, first encounter. First, what you just said about it, some people saying it's the first sci-fi thriller, that's hocus. I mean, that's just hogwash.
Okay.
Because I think 2001, just 3 years before, was a thriller in some regards, and that's a good science fiction movie. So not like you're saying it is actual science, but it is definitely a science fiction thriller. I think that Planet of the Apes is a science fiction thriller.
Interesting, because maybe that's wrong. The term that has come up in research is this created a subgenre called the techno thriller.
That makes more sense.
Using technology but telling it in a thriller style, almost like a spy movie or an action film or whatever, but technology becomes a huge and fantastical technology becomes a huge component of it.
And it's the birth of Michael Crichton, who basically, that was his thing forever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was his genre, his niche anyway. But I don't know. I would probably push back on you because I do not think that 2001 or Planet of the Apes are thrillers. I would never call those thrillers. I'd call them science fiction films, but I would never call them thrillers.
I think that
Uh,
the end, I think all the stuff with Hal and him at the end is very heart pounding. And then
it is,
Planet of
but
the Apes is just, it's more of an action film, I guess.
yes. Well, it's a science fiction film. You can have action in science fiction.
Any science fiction film of the 50s where there's a monster is thrilling as well. Even your favorite, the one with Robbie the Robot.
Forbidden Planet?
Forbidden Planet, that has thrilling aspects to it as well.
I just don't think, to me, a thriller is a suspense horror. Alfred Hitchcock is thriller. So I don't think Forbidden Planet has those elements. I guess it could, and if we analyze it, it certainly could, because we'll find justification.
Well, and you're also talking to the horror half of the podcast who
Correct.
was looking
Correct.
for that in films as well. As far as first encounters, though, and I think I told you this when we did the original on our first season, I saw this movie with you at your house on that TV that was on the little rolling cart
Yeah. Okay.
in like the 80s
Yeah.
sometime. And your mother was at work, and like you and I were there watching it
Uh-huh.
in the afternoon.
Yep. I vaguely remember that, but that's probably true.
Yeah.
I totally agree. It happened, probably. Wait, were we watching a broadcast or was it VHS?
I'm pretty sure you had a VHS because I don't know how we would have timed it as far as it being on television on a weekday afternoon. But
Yeah, I've owned it in almost every medium. So
yeah,
I had a VHS. I had a VHS that I got off of cable when it aired and I recorded it. Had the DVD, the Blu-ray. So of course I would have this particular movie. But so do you remember liking it at the time? Or
I
did you go,
do.
it was okay?
I probably appreciate it more now because I know and am very admiring of the pedigree behind it. But at the time, I thought it was great. Yeah, it was fine. It wasn't a
Okay.
horror movie, but it was great.
Wasn't a horror movie, but it was good. So, for those of you who haven't watched it, go ahead and stop right now and go watch it and come back because we will spoil it, and we always do. But a brief synopsis is we are basically thrown into a biological contagion movie. And by thrown in, we are literally thrown into it. It starts with a small, extremely small town called Piedmont, New Mexico, which supposedly a satellite that the United States had launched into orbit has crashed, and a team is going in to recover it, but they discover that every person in the town is dead. And when the team goes in to recover it, the guys going in die as well, which authorizes a wildfire situation. And then for the rest of the movie, we are following the wildfire team, which is a specially chosen 5 scientist group of the United States, which are sent to a wildfire complex, which is a biological containment facility deep in the desert and hidden underground, as they fight off trying to find out what this organism is and how it kills people, but B, why a baby and an elderly man would both be left alive in this town, and what do they have in common that could possibly do that. It is based on a novel by Michael Crichton. It was his first novel, and I have in my notes he actually wrote that while he was graduating medical school. He wrote Andromeda Strain. So it was that type of timing for him. It was directed by Robert Wise, who Tim will readily agree has a huge pedigree in cinema.
He
And
is an
I think
American treasure.
I think he's fairly underrated. You hear about all these people talking about directors, and I do it myself. Oh, I'm going to watch here's a collection of directors' films, and you see Stanley Kubrick or Alfred Hitchcock, Steven Spielberg, even Martin Scorsese, but nobody suddenly goes Robert Wise, and yet his movies have been incredible.
He's
Is it
phenomenal.
because he is so eclectic in his genre choices, you think? So,
Um,
like, Hitchcock is the thriller guy, and we know he's the thriller guy, but you don't have a niche to put Robert Wise in. Does that make sense?
it does. I I don't know where to begin with him. We actually had a guy. I don't know if he still listens to the podcast or not, that had written a book about Robert Wise, and he sent it to me, and it was
Mm.
huge. It was like 600 or 800 pages, and so I read the chapters just on the movies that we liked, that were sci-fi or horror, and obviously he's done both, but he's got so many connections to other Hollywood history. He got his start as an editor for Orson Welles on
Yep.
Citizen
On
Kane.
Citizen Kane. Yes.
But then he stayed at RKO doing low budget movies. With Val Lewton, he began directing. So he's connected to Orson Welles and he's connected to Val Lewton, two huge people in Hollywood history.
He
But
also
then
has
he,
two of the best science fiction, two of my favorite science fiction films of all time, this being one of them, and The Day There Stood Still.
right,
Hmm.
right. So he's done that. He also did the first Star Trek film. It's not the greatest film in the world, but it's very renowned, especially in some ways for not being great. He he did I Want to Live with Susan Hayward. He did Run Silent, Run Deep with Clark Gable. He did one of my all-time favorite movies, West Side Story, and then followed it with Sound of Music, which is
Yeah.
huge. And then he did
Yep.
The Haunting, which is based on a book by one of my favorite writers, Richard Matheson. Then after Star Trek, the motion picture, I think, then we started seeing him less because he was getting older. Just that alone is why I call him an American treasure. He, to me, is the epitome of an American treasure in this category of film.
Wiki actually says he is a director in a striking variety of film genres: horror, noir, western, war, film noir, science fiction, musical, and drama. And so again, I posit the theory. I think that's why when people say, oh, let's list the great American directors, and they list all of these Kubricks and Spielbergs and Lucases and all of this, or Scorsese's, they don't list Robert Wise, or he's way low on the list. And I think that's a mistake, to your point. He is a treasure. Mostly because from what, and again, doing research, he does meticulous planning of his projects. And this was at a time in the 60s and 70s before the auteurs really took over like they did in the 80s and 90s. And you had the Spielbergs and the Lucases and everyone that were involved in every little single aspect of everything design wise and all that. Weiss was doing that back for West Side Story and back in Sound of Music. And a lot of preparation and a lot of in interviews and you can find some great interviews with him in behind the scenes work on YouTube and in the commentaries on some of these DVDs of his. But he talks about how he wants the film to have its own voice and how that sometimes is dependent upon the actors, the writers, the location, the music, if it's the musical, but they have to, and he says, and that voice influences how he directs the film, meaning where he puts the camera, what he points at, what he focuses in, how he edits it. And I'm wondering if he got that from Wells, since he was an editor for Wells and RKL. I wonder if he got that instinct of let the piece speak for itself. And Sound of Music looks totally different than The Haunting, but they both are perfect for the story that they're telling.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so funny. And I mentioned all those movies, and I didn't mention this one or The Day the Earth Stood Still, which are two other ones that he did.
Yeah.
And then also, when he was working with Val Lewton, he did The Body Snatcher, which is Robert Louis Stevenson starring Boris
Mm-hmm.
Karloff. And he also did the sequel to Cat People, which I watched recently, and it is a Christmas movie. I would do it at Christmas on this podcast because it's just a really good sequel. Not necessarily scary, but it has some of the same characters in it. So, yeah, the list goes on. And then pair him with Michael Crichton, who was young and new at the time, But that's why I think this movie is so good. It's because of the people involved in it. It doesn't have a stellar cast. They're good and capable, but they're unknown relatively unless you watch television because a lot of them are TV actors. I did want to correct you on one thing, though. It's not Michael Crichton's first novel. He wrote 5 other novels under a name called John Lange before he did Andromeda Strain.
Thank you. Yes.
Those were not necessarily science fiction, though, I don't think. They don't sound like it.
No, I think they were more dramas or maybe some of the thriller element. I haven't read.
And maybe even some of the medical. One's called A Case of Need. But he was also not always in the sci-fi genre. Even after Andromeda Strain, he wrote The Great Train Robbery, which is a Western. So anyway, so Michael Crichton's obviously talented as well. And they became longtime friends after this film.
Well, Crichton, this novel was hugely successful when it came out. It came out in 1969, and they had already, I think in galleys, it had already been bought, and they were trying to work on adapting it to a film from a production angle. So that was one of the things that was very prophetic for Crichton. This is the guy that gave us Jurassic Park and Coma, everything else.
Timeline, even some of the lesser ones, Rising Sun, which is a thriller as well. Even that horrible one with Gene Simmons, Runaway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I like Crichton's style in the fact that his novels have a really cool arc and build to all of them. And I like this one, the movie follows, the screenplay follows the novel in the fact that it's basically got 4 sections, and each section is a different day. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And each one of those sections is the elevation of the plot going forward and the introduction of these characters and the way his characters are, even like probably bad casting in Gene Simmons doing it, but I like that villain character. I thought he was pretty cool in that movie from the character perspective, not from his performance.
I just have bad memories of that film.
Yeah, well, it's not a good film.
I saw it with David Farmer in a theater, and we did everything short of walking out. We were like, "This is horrible."
Yeah, it was, and he directed that one too, didn't he?
I think so.
I think
and he was not as good a director as he is a writer.
No, not.
However, did he direct Westworld? He did, didn't he? No, I can't. We just covered that. Yes. I can't even remember. Yes, we covered it a couple seasons ago.
That was the first time they allowed him to direct.
I think so.
So, yeah.
And that's probably my favorite of all of his directed movies, I would think.
But think of even the characters in Jurassic. Dr. Malcolm, Mr. Hammond. He's got some really cool, eccentric, unique, great characters. And that's what this movie requires. All of these characters are eclectic, eccentric, unique, and very well presented. We've talked on the podcast before about if you're writing a screenplay or telling a story, how your characters enter the story is extremely important. It's like a play. The first time you see that character on stage, it's important. It's not that they need to come on and give a speech, but they need a unique entrance. Mm-hmm. Spielberg is really great about that, how he introduces his characters. And I think all 5 of the characters introduced in this are perfect, the way they're introduced.
Well, that's a good segue to scenes, if you want to go to some scenes.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, you know what my favorite is.
Go for it. You go for it.
It's the one right behind me when they first discover the whole town is dead.
Yeah.
It's extremely creepy because you're like, well, it's very post-apocalyptic, which, one of my favorite genres. So it seems apocalyptic and I love it. And then, of course, eventually you find out that there's a baby and an old man still alive and that's it.
Yeah. And the way they do it with even his shot structure of showing the long shot of the helicopter hovering and the ladder comes down and then it just cuts and all you're seeing is like a dust storm and the storm clears and they're both standing there and the helicopter's flying away. Mm-hmm. Just the way again, telling the story visually that makes the most sense because you really feel abandoned as soon as that helicopter flies away. It's like, oh my God, they have no way to get out. If this is a Danny Boyle and suddenly 700 running zombies come around the corner, they're dead.
Which is what goes through my mind immediately, of course.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
That's a great one. That's a good scene.
Yeah, so that would be one of my favorites.
mine would be the explanation scene in at Wildfire when they're on level 2 and they're getting ready to go down. And basically we've got the what's his name? The Olsen character, Mark Hall. Mark Hall is the newbie. He was a replacement to the scientists, and so he doesn't know anything about really wildfire. So he's our audience surrogate to learn everything. And when they're explaining everything, I just love that whole scene in the conference room with the whole, behind them is the screen, and they talk about each level and how the decontamination is going to work. And he's the odd man out hypothesis, which is really cool. And the whole, you have a key that can stop a nuclear device, so don't ever be too far away from the substation. All that techno babble jargon, but it makes you so tense when you go, okay, all of these are plants. These are all Chekhov's guns, all of these, and something's going to happen, which I thought was really, I really love that scene.
Yeah. Well, speaking of nuclear detonation, one of my other favorite scenes is the one where Olsen, I can't remember his character's name, Mark Hall is in the whatever that silo
core
thing. Yeah, the core, or where the laser's shooting at him and he's trying to like not get hit by a laser. That shit works me up. It gets me so stressed out, I guess because it's thrilling.
And the way they did the animation, because the Dr. Stone character, Arthur Hill's character, is watching him on the monitor and going, duck left. You know, and
I'm like, your left or my left?
Yeah. Which left? Where am I going? Yeah. You'd have a laser right in the back.
Oh, yeah. And he gets hit a few times. And I'm not sure, would that make him as groggy as it does? I'm not really sure. Because it obviously affects him when it hits his arm.
It's his face. It's
it hits his face. I thought it hit his arm too. Maybe it missed his arm.
It does. It hits his hand because that's where he's holding the key from. I've always thought that since the very first time I saw this movie. I thought, okay, he got hit in the face with a laser. Did the laser go through him, like through his cheek, through the back of his head, or?
That would make you groggy for sure because it would hit your
brainstem. Or did it come the other way and we're just seeing it come out here? Because he's got his back to the lasers.
Yeah.
So then I started thinking on second and third and 20th watches, yeah, obviously it hit him like back of the head or back of the neck and went through his cheek. And that's why he's groggy, because his whole body is like, you just got shot. You're going under.
Right.
You're going into shock.
Oh.
So yeah, that's a great sequence.
That's intense.
All of his suspense moments work. So from the time Andromeda starts attacking the wildfire facility and has to climb up the core and we're imminent detonation, all that is suspenseful. But even before that, I like the suspense scene of the contagion being loose in the one laboratory and the scientist is stuck in there. When you get the great line, the air is thick with Andromeda.
Is that David Wayne?
Yeah.
Oh my God, he's one of my favorites.
And I think you can't note, especially now, you would probably never be able to film the animal scenes in this.
Oh
and
my
they
God.
Are so disturbing.
They are disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I know that monkey didn't die, it looks like it really dies.
Oh, yeah. And, okay, production and trivia, I'm sure you found out how they did that. How they did because when I was a kid watching this in the 70s and 80s, I was like, oh my God, did they really kill that monkey? And then they killed the rat, and then they killed the guinea pig. What? Oh my God.
Wasn't it something to do with removing the oxygen from the room or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Where the room was, they filled it with carbon dioxide. Yeah. So when they would open the case, it would knock the animal out.
I mean, you literally see that monkey suffocate.
Oh, yeah.
And then I read in trivia that they had somebody ready to resuscitate it immediately off, and you can actually look and see his shadow moving in.
Oh, yeah.
Before the scene is over. That's how fast they were to try and save that monkey's life, that they couldn't re-edit it. They had to just leave that shadow in there of the rescuer.
Because he didn't want to do it again. Yeah.
Right. No, who wants to do that again? I'm sure some PETA things are in place now to protect animals.
Oh, yeah.
But even though it was not humane, they didn't kill the monkey.
Correct.
And they
Or the
didn't kill
rat.
the rat or
Yeah.
anything. It's just they did suffocate it, which is not great.
Well, it's not as bad as hobbling horses to get them to fall on
No,
you
it's
like they
nowhere
used to
near
do.
as bad
It
as
is
what
bad.
Westerns did to horses. No, you're right
Yeah.
there.
But it is disturbing. It works perfectly. It makes you paranoid to even breathe, which works later in scenes where people are having to breathe in an atmosphere that supposedly has the bug in it.
Right.
So it really works for that perspective. I didn't do research, but I'm wondering if maybe this was one of the first movies that had the no animals were harmed in the making of this motion picture.
Maybe. I'm sure it did. I'm sure it's probably in there somewhere. They'd have to.
And then, so any other scenes?
I want to just, most of it would be a segue into cast because of people I just like in this film. I think Kate Reid is fantastic as that one doctor. I love David Wayne because he's a great character actor. Arthur Hill's good too. So any of the
Cast is all
scenes,
good.
and they're the primary cast, so you're going to have them in every scene pretty much.
Well, trivia on that before you jump into casting.
Sure.
In the novel, Dr. Levitt is a man.
I think I read that.
And we didn't mention in the credits, but while we're there, so this screenplay was written by Nelson Gidding. He's the same guy that did the adaptation for The Haunting for Robert Wise as well.
I Want to Live also. Another Robert Wise movie. Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to stay very, very close to the novel because he thought it was such a strong novel. He wanted it to be as much like the structure of the novel as possible. But he's the one that approached Weiss with the idea of what if Dr. Levitt was actually a female? Because he realized, in the entire cast, there was only one female, and it was the nurse. And
it's like
so
the thing.
he thought
no
maybe
women.
it would be interesting. Robert Wise hugely objected to it. He did not want a female in Dr. Levitt's role. And Gidding went to a bunch of other scientists and had them get on a call with Weiss. And Weiss explained that the reason he didn't is because he didn't want the female to be ineffectual, quote, ineffectual like the Raquel Welch character in Fantastic Voyage.
Right. He didn't want her there just for appearances.
And Gidding assured him that A, he would write her in a very strong way, and B, he would keep all the foibles that the character had in the novel, like smoking and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And
Epilepsy.
The other scientists reassured him and said it makes perfect sense for her to for this character to be female.
Right.
And that would not be an issue.
And she's
I think
not Raquel
is,
Welch either. She's not like Bridget Bardot or anything. She's just a normal woman.
She is so good. And going back to what I said earlier about character introductions, her introduction is one of the best ever because she's in that research lab smoking a cigarette and giving orders. And they're going, you have to come with us. She goes, no, I don't. No, I know. And they go, we have this from the Secretary of Science, Robert so-and-so. She goes, well, get Robbie on the phone. I'll talk to him.
Yeah. And it's preceded, if I'm not mistaken, by the one with Arthur Hill at the party where they come, or the military come and basically extract him from his wife and his party and say, you must go. And so you know how serious it is. So to contrast it with them coming for the Kate Reid character's exit and her saying, I'm not going. That's what's so great about it. It makes it work even better.
And again, great character introductions. And the Hill one is great because you get the impression the wife is going, well, he's not going to leave. We're having a dinner party. And I don't care.
We're having a dinner party. How dare you?
Right. And he comes out like, okay, I'll take care of it, honey. And the guy just looks at him and goes, there's a fire, sir. And he takes 2 seconds and turns to her and goes, I've got to go.
I've got to go.
Yeah. And it's great.
Yeah. He just leaves them with head spinning, basically. And they put him in a car and they're off.
Yep. And I love the fact that he keeps that tension up because all four of them see a military presence doing this. It's not just a guy in a uniform. There are weapons drawn. Even the David Wayne character, his daughter looks out the window and sees the soldier walking around the car outside. And so there's this military presence to it too. You mentioned the scene with Hill. That's also, I think, the first time you really, really see the diopter lens, which is a trademark of this movie. He he said he wanted the audience to be able to see two things at once.
Yeah. Very Brian De Palma.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Brian De Palma is a huge key coming
Yeah.
from this. I guarantee he was influenced by this.
I actually, before I move into cast, wanted to say just one little thing I had on production. I didn't realize how successful this movie was. I always just thought it was called science fiction film, but it was a moderate box office success. It was produced only for 6.5 million and it grossed 12.3 million, which that's double, so that's good. It was known as the 16th highest grossing film of 1971. That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
They weren't making nearly as many movies in the 70s, obviously, as they make now. I would say they made at least 100 movies maybe that year,
Yeah.
75,
Yeah.
and this was number 16. So that's a good deal.
It had great marketing. It told a great story. And I think it got great word of mouth.
Well, and as you said, it was a techno thriller, which was new to people, too, combining science fiction and the aspects of government.
A spy novel.
Right. It's very X-Files in a way when you think about it, because you've got the military involvement and whether or not this is a cover-up or what have you.
That's the other thing that I want to say before we jump just into cast.
Sure.
Is structurally, too, I like the way Gidding and Crichton, because you realize the entire thing's a flashback, too, which is very similar to earlier this season we did Europa Report. And it's basically the whole movie is a flashback because we're just coming forward with this information now of everything that happened the past year. And this is like a Senate hearing, and they keep cutting to that at weird moments where you're following the characters and Andromeda and the baby and the old guy, and suddenly, boom, we're in a Senate hearing, and they're going, well, why didn't the teleprinter work? And blah, blah, blah. And you're going, what is going on?
It's a Crichton trademark. He does that in his novels, too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of the cutaways that are either flash forwards, flashbacks, or they're counterintuitive to what's happening plot-wise, which was great. But yeah, I just wanted to say that because I really thought that from a plotting angle, that was really good. We see outside of Wildfire, rather than containing everything to this one scientific structure for the entire 90 minutes, we can cut outside and show a jet where the guy's rubber dissolves and he crashes the jet. And now we're doing the whole investigation over here that they don't know about. They're so isolated, they don't know what's going on, or vice versa. So I thought that was really cool to ratchet up the suspense too.
Sorry, I keep jumping to keys because they keep popping into my head.
Well, please do it.
Okay. All right, cast. We'll go on to cast. Arthur Hill plays Dr. Jeremy Stone. He's, I think, top billed in this movie.
Yeah.
He's a Canadian actor with a very, very familiar face. If you watch television in the 70s and the 80s, you will recognize him.
Yes,
what I didn't know is that he is a stage actor. So I dove a little deeply into some of these guys since we don't know them so well, and found out that he won a Tony Award in 1963 playing George in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Wow.
Which is one of my favorite shows and movies. But his Broadway roles also include being in the Pulitzer Prize winning All the Way Home and Look Homeward, Angel. So he was in both of those. So, and both of those were Pulitzer Prize nominated. So he's highly regarded on the stage. And then I guess he made the leap to television, as some stage actors do, because it's steady income.
Well, he went immediately, I think, from this into Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law, which was his big series.
Okay.
It was on for I think 3 years or something like that. And I think, so that's where he became, I think, a household name then. Because before then he had done a few movies, but after that he was definitely a television guy.
Right. After him, I have David Wayne listed. I don't know if these are listed in any particular order because I can't get them off IMDb anymore. They've got some weird thing going on with their casting. David Wayne plays Dr. Charles Dutton. He is another very familiar face. He is a character actor, one of my favorite character actors that I would associate with Burgess Meredith, which is ironic because both of them played villains on Batman.
Yeah. Wasn't
but
he the Mad Hatter?
he was the Mad Hatter on
The Mad
Batman,
Hatter.
and Burgess Meredith was the Penguin. And we've talked a lot about Burgess Meredith here lately because he was in movies that we've seen, including Burn Offerings and Magic, where he has great roles. He can take the smallest of role and make it so good. And I think David Wayne does that in this film. I think it is probably the lesser of the four characters, but he makes it strong because he's David Wayne.
Yeah.
James Olsen.
Well, before that, David
Sure.
Wayne, also a little trivia I have on him is he
Yeah.
also came from theater, and he came from television theater too. He did a few Playhouse 90s and a Twilight Zone or two. So you've seen him.
That's Burgess Meredith too.
Yeah. So parallel careers for them, sort of.
And they're
thing.
both short and memorable little character actors.
Yeah.
Yeah, highly memorable. James Olsen plays Dr. Mark Hall, who really is the lead of this movie, even if he didn't get top. I think he may have got billing over Arthur Hill.
I don't think so. But
No? Okay, maybe not. He has done some film, but a lot more theater, and he was also a television actor. I don't know a lot about him, and I thought, I'm going to do some digging. And
okay.
he is one of those actors, and this is pure speculation on my part, that I think was a closeted gay man because he never had kids, he never got married, and you cannot find a scrap of information about his personal life out there. So usually that's a strong indicator that he was potentially gay, because if he wasn't, you would have at least seen maybe some women he dated or was engaged
Tim,
to.
we say he enjoyed a bachelor lifestyle.
Yeah, that's right. He was a perpetual bachelor.
He was a perpetual bachelor.
But anyway, that's just my speculation. I think he's strong in this movie, especially when he gets a laser in the face.
Well, I think he's strong just because, again, he's our audience surrogate. So he is reacting the way we would when they suddenly say, well, here's your key and blah, 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 nuclear device. And all he hears is key to nuclear device. He goes, you think I'm really going to blow this up? And they go, no, you don't understand. You're not blowing it up. You have to stop it. And he's like, what? And so all of his reactions, I think, work too. His introduction is a negative. He is just about to scalpel into somebody in a surgery suite. And they go, put the knife down. You're coming with us. And he goes, what? No, I'm not. And he's very anti what they're talking about and very skeptical and all the way through. So he's our audience surrogate. I also have in my notes, he came from Playhouse 90, Armstrong Theater, all these other television plays.
Right.
That when they transitioned theater into television.
Yeah, it's like, where was Robert Wise that he found or knew of these people? Because it's a strong cast, but a very unique cast because it's not people you see all the time. Speaking of which, Kate Reed played Dr. Ruth Levitt. As you mentioned, in the novel, the character is a man. They change it to a woman. For those of you that don't know, she is a British Shakespearean actor. She's played numerous characters from Lady Macbeth to Kate in Taming of the Shrew, which I could see very easily, either one of those. But guess what else she did? She made her Broadway debut in the 1962 version of Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf opposite Arthur Hill.
Perfect.
Yeah. And he won a Tony for that role. And obviously Robert Wise probably saw that show and said, I want them in my movie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How else? I guess he could have found them other ways. But anyway, it just seems very coincidental that they were both in the same Broadway production of an Edward Albee play. So I found that fascinating.
And I have credits for her that were the ITV, which is British, ITV Play of the Week, Armchair Theater, the Wayne and Schuster Hour. So all of these adaptation plays for television thing. So it's interesting that they all four share that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's why the movie's still strong without familiar faces. Well, familiar to cinema faces. Anyway,
Yeah.
Paula Kelly plays Karen Anderson. She is the nurse at Wildfire. I just recently saw her in something that I rewatched over the summer, last summer, and that is Soylent Green. She's opposite
Yes.
Charlton Heston in that movie. Very familiar
She's
face in
she's
genre
property. Yep.
film. Yeah. So we had Paula Kelly, and then I don't have much more. George Mitchell was Jackson. He was in 3 episodes of Dark Shadows. Raymond Bierry was Arthur Manchek, The Scoop Mission Control. He was in Badlands, which I watched recently, which is the film with Sissy Spacek and Martin Sheen.
He's also in Sorcerer, which is the Roy Scheider one that I almost watched.
The one
instead
that
of
you almost
Sorcerers.
watched.
Instead of Sorcerers. And I think he's got a lot of the actors they put in this have character faces you recognize.
Mostly television, but yeah.
Mostly television or Westerns, General Sparks, Major Manchek, all of them are very recognizable.
Yeah, I don't really have anything for the rest of the cast, but I would like to point out to those of you out there listening, when we say, oh, they're recognizable from television, David and I are, of course, ancient men that lived in the age of when there were only 3 networks and you watched whatever was on those 3 networks. Yep. People nowadays don't understand that reference probably when we say that, unless they're our age or a little younger than us, but because there's so many options out there for television now, it just that's an ancient concept. But back in the day, you would have seen them on ABC, NBC, or CBS.
You would have seen this movie on them too.
Yeah, movie of the week.
Oh,
for sure. So that's what I have for cast. As far as awards, this movie was nominated for 2 Oscars. It was nominated for art direction and editing, which makes sense. It lost to Nicholas and Alexander for art, and the reason it did not win editing is because that was the year of the French Connection, which took the top 3 awards and editing. And that makes sense, too, because William Friedkin was a force that year.
Oh, yeah.
Its score was nominated for a Golden Globe. It lost to Shaft. Isaac Hayes, I believe. I think he's who did
Probably
Shaft.
because of the song.
Yeah, probably. It was nominated for a Hugo for dramatic presentation. It lost to, want to guess? 1971.
I don't know. Sorry.
A Clockwork Orange.
Ah, makes sense.
Another great film, another great science fiction film. And this movie is not on the 1001 movies you must see before you die list. I kind of disagree with that, and I'm sure you do as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I definitely disagree.
It should be up there with some of Weiss's other. Weiss has probably got 5 on there already, if not more.
Yeah.
But this one probably should have been there too. So that's awards.
I've got some trivia or
Okay.
a few little things, mostly from my watch notes and reasons I love it. If you are a modern movie viewer, you do have to accept this for the technology of the time. So there are typewriters. Those are strange metal things with keys that used to print out stuff before we had screens. There is no computer generation imagery in this at all. As a matter of fact, they were coming up with special effects and ideas for this, which leads me to the special effects for this movie were done by Douglas Trumbull, who went on to do little things like, he had just come from 2001, but then he went on to do little things like Silent Running and Close Encounters and movies like that. Very, very brilliant special effects guy. He horribly underbid his bid for this. When they told him, oh, can you do the special effects for this? He read it and said, yeah, and gave them a figure before he even realized, because he was so new to being on his own and doing being his own special effects coordinator, that he didn't know how difficult it would be to suddenly do stuff where you're having to show on a screen on the wall, before we had screens the size of walls, the different layers of this complex and being able to 360-degree turn them at will and move them. And all of that was done as projection and different slit screen technology. So the same way the diopter polar thing was done like vertical like this to show different things, they would turn it on its side to show the different layers. So when they would move, each one would come into focus different than the one before it.
It's funny that you're mentioning that because it's like an effect. And this, I have in my trivia that this was one of the earliest known examples of computer generated imagery. Is when Mark is being tracked by that targeting computer guiding the laser weapon.
And even that is, he's a wireframe. He's a box with he's a stick figure that goes and moves over. But yes, that was done with a computer, but by animation, meaning it was still store. So they would take an image and they would essentially animate it like cell animation, only using a computer made graphic. So then the graphic would alter this way and they would take a picture and alter this way and they would take a picture and
animate it. So
that's how they animated it.
That's funny.
And ironic. He was trying to, yes.
Go ahead. I was just going to say ironic that he worked with Spielberg on Jurassic Park, which was like the biggest computer animated effects we had thus far with those dinosaurs. Yes. And here he is attached to this film, which has the very first use of computer generated imagery. So it's interesting.
Yep. But he was asked to come up with all of these decontamination effects and how do you do those? And then he said, the one that got me the most was they said, and now you have to show Andromeda. And I had no clue. How do you show a crystalline microbe? And what do you do? How do you animate? What do you do? It was very interesting. The way
you enlarge it and draw just weird biology type cellular stuff, I would think.
Right. But remember, he didn't have the resources we have now to just create that in a video editor.
True.
He had to make an image and then another image and then crossfade the focus on it. So it looked like it was growing, but it really wasn't.
Yeah.
So all these effects he had to do, I thought were really great.
Right.
For it.
I have a trivia note that we actually talked about on our first episode of this in the first season, and that is another Spielberg connection. Do you remember what I'm going to get to?
No.
But Michael Crichton was invited to take a tour of Universal Studios during production of this film, and his tour guide was Steven Spielberg, who went on to direct Jurassic Park. That's just phenomenal. It's mind-blowing, really, when you think about it. It is just mind-blowing. So,
weren't you the kid that was showing me the tram? Yeah. I've got makeup for this movie was done by Bud Westmore. He's the uncle of Michael Westmore, who was the big Star Trek makeup artist at the time.
That's cool.
I always cringe. I don't like knife cuts anyway. I always cringe in The Thing when he cuts his freaking thumb. The scalpel cut in this just kills me every time because it's like half his wrist and then it bends open and all the blood powders out.
It's the dust. That's what's so cool about it, though, is that it's not liquid. All of a sudden, it's just he's filled with dust.
Yeah, all of their blood has turned to powder.
Yeah.
That's a cool science fiction. Even Star Trek would have done that. Either their white corpuscles are sucked out, Jim, or whatever. I've got all of the time cutting in this is very intelligent. It's not spoon-fed. This is very science fiction all the way down. Even when they have a political, philosophical debate, it's approached from science, not from the politics of it.
I will always remember one thing about this movie. I will remember bunches of things about this movie, but the one thing I will remember most is you always saying that it is a true science fiction movie based on science.
I never knew about epilepsy until I saw this movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if we didn't mention that already, the Kate Reid character, Levitt, has epilepsy.
Yep.
And it's triggered by flashing lights, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Because she has a seizure. They think she's reacting to Andromeda or something, and then they realize that, or Arthur Hill's character realizes, no, she's having a seizure, and he steps on her, or he puts his foot under her head so that she doesn't bang her head on the floor, which I heard is a real thing that they teach people when people have seizures to prevent someone from hurting themselves. I have one other, just one other trivia before we move on, that this is one of those movies that, and not many of them, but they do it more often now than they did then, where it acknowledges the impression that it is a true story based on events. And because it makes it scarier. They did the same thing with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yep.
They go on to thank many people as well as certain government organizations for their generous help and encouragement.
Where we lied about you.
Right. It says it apparently inspired the novel's nonfiction tone right down to Crichton's construction of a fictive bibliography. However, obviously, both the film and the book are fiction. So I think that's cool. So that's a key in itself, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or any of those movies.
I think that's a good segue to keys. Other than the only last note I have is the budget was $6.5 million for this. So in case anyone's keeping score of those things. My first key is a cast key. The technician in the microbiology lab that's working with the doctor and everything else. We see him in 2 scenes. He's the Klingon from Trouble with Tribbles, the same one that should be hauled away as garbage. That's the same actor who plays him. Not that that's a key influence, but it's cool trivia.
I'm putting Tribbles up so that I get the right link. I'm going to go back to my standard, as I always do. You're going to laugh when I tell you, and most people out there have never heard of this movie, but it is called Where Have All the People Gone? It is a television movie starring Peter Graves, James Arness's brother, and it's one where folks wake up and there's been like an apocalypse and everyone's dead. And they're, ironically enough, instead of bodies, they find just clothing with powder where their skin has turned to crystals like salt. And it's got something to do with radiation from the sun. It's a really hokey movie, but it's a favorite because I remember it as a child. It's a nostalgic favorite. And it just has elements of the same that are in Andromeda Strain.
You gave me a quasi key of that, the Omega Glory episode of Star Trek.
Another one.
They go aboard the Exeter, the other Constitution class, and all the uniforms are there with all this powder around them.
Right.
And yeah.
It's the exact same. It's the same. It's the same mystery, sci-fi mystery element, I guess you would say. What happened to these people? Yeah.
I found 2 production notes. I want to jump in. Boris Levin designed all the sets, which I love. I love the cylindrical hallways and everything. Although they only designed one. They built one hallway and the interior rooms, and then they just repainted them for each level, which was really a cool idea to do it. But from a production, and Albert Whitlock did the matte paintings.
That makes sense.
Same guy that did Slaughterhouse-Five and The Thing and Star Trek. So
yeah, he was an artist. We were talking about the cylindrical halls and stuff. I liked all the prep as well for when they first arrived, like the decontamination. And they have a nude scene where all 4 of them are walking naked into like an area to be decontaminated. Yep. And there's no like modesty at all. They're all scientists and they're just naked walking in a line, basically. Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Well, in my pre-adolescent mind, I was going boobs because when they do the montage of dead people in Piedmont, there's a girl in bed who's naked.
Yeah, that's right.
But they don't treat it like sensationalism. It's from a very scientific, clinical perspective.
I'm going to put Night of the Living Dead because they do the same thing. There's a nude zombie and it's not glorified or anything as well. Yeah. It just appears. Yeah.
Yeah. I have War of the Worlds because it reminds me of that when at the very beginning, when the guys are trying to access Piedmont with their binoculars and they're slowly going into the town in the truck. And then we're only hearing what happens to them over the audio comm box back at headquarters, and adds to all the tension and the suspense and everything else. It's just like War of the Worlds when they're going to investigate and we have to hear the guys die rather than see it.
I have, believe it or not, another zombie movie, Return of the Living Dead, with the whole, oh my God, there's a nuclear bomb at the end of the movie and they're going to blow up. Except in Return of the Living Dead, they don't thwart it. It happens. In this, they are able to avoid it. But
Yeah, that's a
you
good
got the
one.
whole countdown thing.
I have Resident Evil, both the game and then the movies, because they're definitely reflective of this. I think they were hugely inspired by this. Usually in the game, in the first game, you're investigating a mansion that's gone silent. Everybody's died in it, supposedly. And it's because a microbe was released. And
Mm.
then as each of the games expand, it gets bigger. I think it's Umbrella. It's the name of the corporation that has released this. And that's part of this novel too, that is in the film, but again, seen from a scientific perspective, less than a philosophical, the whole look of, is man's technology getting faster than he can handle it? Almost like a key would be AI. This is like early AI because they say early on, everything is in the computer. The computer handles and controls everything. You don't have to input all this stuff and you don't have to do all this stuff. The computer will handle it. And at the end, the computer is the one that almost kills them
Hmm.
because the defense mechanism says that the microbe is released and my orders are to kill you now.
Which is very, not, is it 2001? I mean,
Sort of.
2001 is really the computer AI taking over and having a
Ye-
mind of its
yes,
own.
correct.
But there are other countdown movies, though, or like Alien, for instance, would be one
Yep.
where you
Yep.
have the countdown at the end that you've got to figure out how to deactivate or escape. I have The Stand, the
Yep.
Stephen
I
King.
understand. Of
Yeah,
course.
that's another one of those where it's biological and it's not extraterrestrial, but it wipes out humanity, basically.
Yeah. Robert McCammon has his version of that too.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah.
Swan Song is the
Swan
name
Song.
of it. But Swan Song is not a biological. Swan Song is a nuclear war.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct. They've
it's
destroyed
like a
the.
nuclear holocaust that people have survived.
But I think there's a couple of Dean Koontzes, which are microbiology thrillers.
Not a surprise.
There's
Yeah,
Contagion is very similar to this movie, and I think inspired by this movie, the Dustin Hoffman film.
I totally agree. I had
Um,
that one. I always go to that one for those type movies, although there's probably many more we could choose from. Contagion's the one that always pops into my head.
I also wonder if Crichton in the novel and then Weiss in the design, or what's his name in Boris Levin in the design, was inspired by Dante's Inferno of the decreasing levels going down in each one. In Inferno, isn't it that the smaller the circle gets, the more pure you are and ready to go to heaven, going through the layers of hell?
I
I
don't
think
know.
that's right. And so that would be similar to this. Each level of wildfire is more clean than the one before it,
Okay.
less destructive and less horrible.
I'm an English major. I'm aware of Dante, and I know there's levels of hell, but I never had to read it, so I don't know the story,
Okay.
basically. I have one that I can't really put a link to, but as far as the book, we'll just say the book is a key to this,
Oh, yeah.
obviously. And Michael Crichton wrote it when he was still a medical student, and he
Yep.
was inspired after having a conversation with one of his teachers about the concept of crystallized life forms.
Hmm.
So that's where the inspiration for the book came from, which obviously inspired the movie.
Well, and if we're talking keys and relations, then again, going back to Star Trek, Devil in the Dark is a silicon-based life form.
Oh my God,
Eh,
I'm going to have to put 3 links to classic Star Trek in this.
Yeah. And
That's
coming out
funny.
of this and the new movie, Life, that one we discussed, I think, when we were talking about Europa Report,
Hmm.
I think that creature in that is silicon based as well,
Okay.
the different life form. I've got any realistic science fiction movie that came from this. Either 2001 predates this, but anything, even up to The Martian,
That's a
Apollo
good one, actually.
13, Moon, Arrival, treating science like it's an integral part of Arrival really got to me because I think there's several parallels. The scientist, even though she's a linguist, not a scientist, but she and the team, her partnership is what propels the plot forward and solves the problem.
The mystery.
And there's also fast forwards and fast flashbacks in The Arrival.
Mhm.
Gravity, Contact, all these other uber realistic, the science, the technology in the film is plausible in that realm,
Well, and Gravity
sort of thing.
is like an off the charts thriller too. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you were just heart racing the whole time.
From that
Yeah,
first scene on, you're
yeah.
there. Yep.
I only have one, the one, and you've already mentioned it, but I think it bears mentioning, and that is Fantastic Voyage. The way they tried
Hmm.
not to do it with a hot woman to
Yes.
sell the movie or
Yeah.
whatever. Who directed that? That was the guy that did 20,000 Leagues, isn't it? I can't.
Yeah.
I think I
Uh,
can't remember. It's also about a submarine. I may be confusing it.
well, no, it's right. It is a
Is it
submarine, but
right?
I
Okay,
think you're right. I just can't remember his name
because
right
it's a
now, and
he
that's
was like a
killing me.
Disney director type. Yeah,
Fleischer? Fleischer,
Fleischer. I
maybe?
think you're right. I think because we covered those early
Mhm.
on too before
I've
video.
got Ice Station Zebra because
Oh,
it is, although a political thriller, it's basically the commies, the British, and the Americans all fighting each other. But the entire plot is propelled because they're going to get a satellite that has crashed in a place. And so it reminded me of this as far as plot and preparation. And also it deals with if we don't contain this, it could end the world. In Zebra, it's nuclear war, but in this one, it's microbial. So,
okay. And I lied. I have more keys.
yay.
They're ones I caught from IMDb, but they're ones I was unaware of. Like, are
Sure.
you familiar with the Ipcris file?
Ipcris. I've heard the name, but I've never seen that film.
Crichton was inspired to write his book after reading that book by Lee Dayton, the Ipcris file. He was impressed by the book. A lot of Andromeda is traceable to Ipcris in terms of trying to create an imaginary world using a recognizable technique and real people.
Wow.
So your whole thing about basing it in science, I think, is the same thing.
Yeah.
So this Ipcris file, I've never read it either, so I'm not familiar with it.
I
They
have
also remade
to.
it into
Yep.
a
That's what,
2008 movie. Yeah,
and
or
it sucks.
miniseries.
It is so bad.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
produced by Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, and Frank Darabont, and it's bad. Damn,
Yes.
that sucks.
Yeah. They change a lot of the characters around and give traits to different ones, and it's heavy on the action. And this is
I'm
not
not
an
surprised.
action movie.
No.
This is a movie about intellect and thinking and solving puzzles. It's not
Yeah,
about
that's
action.
almost like anti Andromeda Strain. That's
Yeah.
not good at all. I got where they did change characters. Benjamin Bratt was one of the characters, and they
Hmm.
had Ricky Schroeder play a gay guy, I
Hmm.
guess, because they wanted some more diversity to it, but it apparently didn't work. Go ahead.
The last one I've got is and this may, again, I didn't research it enough to find out, but this does have a essentially, although short, a post-credit scene because the credits have no music, which is
Right.
a cool statement. But at the very end, you hear the tone come up again, that alarm tone, that whamma, 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 whamma. And you see the image of Andromeda again, and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows, and then the screen goes to black.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah. So it's like its own little semi post-credit scene of Andromeda's coming,
Like, so it
you
could be
know?
Marvel, I guess would be a key to that. Maybe Marvel.
Yeah. Marvel, any post-credit, but they're the ones that really have capitalized on the post-credit.
Yeah, they do it
So,
more than anybody.
yeah.
And then very much like I can't remember what movie it was we did, but I remember we did a movie not long ago that I had a bunch of musical cues to,
Hmm.
or keys to. Well, I have a bunch of musical keys to this one. The phrase experiment with your own life, damn it, and the
Hmm.
sound of the self-destruct alarm are sampled in a color box song called Just Give 'Em Whiskey,
Okay.
along with samples from Crichton's later movie, Westworld and The Prisoner, 1967. So they sample a lot of sci-fi in that song. Progressive metal band Shadow Gallery has a song called The Andromeda Strain about a genetically engineered weapon on Room 5.
Hmm.
And then the death metal, a lot of metal. The death metal band Nocturnus has a song called Andromeda Strain on their debut album, The Key.
All right then.
So there was some musical cues as well, keys as well.
The music, we didn't mention it, but the music to this I love because it's not music. It's as far as keys go, it reminds me a lot of Planet of the Apes.
Oh,
it's very
okay.
Tonal and acoustic and synthetic. Which
I was going to say Forbidden Planet, but that's funny that you.
Well, and they even said that they were influenced by the two composers of this. I think it's. No, the single composer of this said that he was influenced by the duo that did, the husband and wife team that did Forbidden Planet.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me.
So that's a big key.
Yeah.
But it reminds me a lot of Shostakovich, or that the very tribal, not instrumentation wise, but the beats and the tempos like Planet of the Apes. So.
Yeah, it's very creepy sounding tones and stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for keys. And for those of you out there that are listening, we hope you enjoyed this redux of the Andromeda Strain. I think it is safe to say that David and I both like this movie. We both highly recommend it. It should be on the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die list, even though it is not. It is directed by an American treasure named Robert Wise and written by a sci-fi treasure, Michael Crichton. Yep. So that is what we think. We'd like to know what you think. You can always comment down below if you're watching us on YouTube. If not, give us a shout out on the podcast waves. You can go to our website. We can take comments there as well. You can also get a full itinerary of everything that we have ever done on this podcast and YouTube show. And if you're wanting to feel supportive, that is always welcome as well. David and I would like to upgrade our equipment again and get some better things to make us more digestible, for lack of better words. You can watch us over on Patreon. We have a lot of free stuff over there, as well as some subscription tiers, which include a couple of other shows, including one on the original Star Trek. We've done 2 seasons of the classic Star Trek, and we have done 3 seasons of a show called X-Files Declassified, which is the first 3 seasons of the X-Files. We're getting ready to move into the 4th, and we're toying around with doing another show over there as well. It's in the early stages still. Yeah. And until next week, when are we going to be in sci-fi land? Where are we going to be next week?
We're creepy next week.
Oh, we did.
And it's a double.
Oh my gosh. You are right. We are back in horror land, and it is creepy 60s black and white movies.
Yeah.
All right, David. I will see you then.
All right. See you then.
All right. Take care.
Start the car. Johnny has the keys.